RETINA.
Good evening, Rezzers. Retina Prime, feeling fine. And here we are on our very first podcast episode for the Resident Evil Theories, Insights, News Analysis YouTube page. Or Retina if you just want to say it short. Anyway, we're here tonight to discuss the future of the Resident Evil series, whether it be the games, any potential film work, or even more with the CGI series, who knows. And joining me today, we have 4 separate people from the Resident Evil online content creation group and fans as well. And first up, we have the creator of the Carrier fan series, Carrier. So, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Next up, we have one of the biggest Twitter accounts for Resident Evil fun and general facts, and also just general banter. And that is Resident Evil Central.
Hello.
Hey, very good to have you back.
Good to see us.
Next up, we have one of the fastest growing survival horror YouTube channel owners. It is Phil from AK Black and Red.
How are you doing?
Yeah, doing excellent. Good to have you back and good to be joining you again. And finally, we have a man who apparently can't say my name without saying RETINA, but is one of the best horror content creators on here. It is Biohazard Declassified. Welcome.
Very grateful to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. And here we all are together. It's good to have you all here, and I'm glad that we're going to be discussing the future of the Resident Evil franchise, not just its games, but also any spin-off media we may see in the future. So I'm going to kick off with the obvious thing that we've had recently is that obviously Resident Evil Village has its recent release of its DLC, the Winter's Expansion. Obviously the biggest thing in there was the Shadows of Rose DLC. So just a quick thing though, for anyone who's watching, we are going to be obviously discussing story and gameplay from that DLC. If you want to avoid it, please just click on the timestamp in the description below. Thank you guys. Okay, so obviously we've all played the Shadows of Rose DLC. I'm hoping if you haven't, I'd just mute yourself and run away from the webcam now. But you should have really known that before you came on. So I just want to hear everyone's thoughts on what you thought of it in general. What were your biggest highlights of it? So I'm going to make it interesting. We're going to start with Carrier. What do you think?
I thought it was a good send-off to the Winter's Saga, a nice conclusion to it. I do feel like it kind of fell in with some of the kind of just narrative tropes that Village had, where some points worked and some points were really highlighted as they were great. And other points kind of just felt a bit lackluster. I think for me, the highlight of it was kind of like parallel to the House Benevento section, where you're walking around and those mannequins just follow you every time you don't see them. That's like actual horror right there, and I think Capcom's doing a good job of kind of picking up where they can find those little tidbits of just things that can scare the player, and want to see more of that. But all in all, it was a great kind of conclusion to the story. I had my issues with it, but it was pretty good.
Okay, excellent. It did feel like there was some kind of little nuggets of bits that were really good, but others maybe didn't quite land. There was also kind of like quality over quantity that we got.
Yeah, the other thing too is just it's kind of getting to the point where the kind of mechanics, the gameplay mechanics, and the way the character handles when you move him around, starting to feel a little bit outdated, a little bit sluggish, moving rows around the tight corridors when those faceless creatures come at you. Hard to navigate around it. So found myself getting pretty frustrated with that every now and then.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to, let's see. Yeah, Will, so what were your thoughts on the DLC overall, or Shadows of Rose in particular?
No, I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved the new tone that Capcom's going forward with it and introducing the more horror aspect into the Resident Evil games. It's one of the biggest things that got me in the franchise, so seeing that the true survival horror side of it coming back, steering away from the action's really good. I loved how it gave a new context to the actual ending of Village. Obviously, it's been exactly the same. That conversation that Rose has with like the security guard and stuff holds a lot more meaning. What she went through in the DLC. Overall, no, it definitely. I was really impressed by it.
Yep, good. Right, so Okay, so Phil, what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them are similar lines to what everyone said already. I mean, in terms of the gameplay, it definitely felt a lot more survival horror than the main base game did. And that was, I think, one of its strongest elements. I also liked the way they kind of incorporated, particularly that final fight with Miranda, where the way they incorporated the mechanics of her powers without it feeling overpowered. You still had to work for it, especially. I just today actually finished it on hardcore, and Jesus Christ, that fight. But yeah, so I think I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the way it was done. But I mean, from a story point of view, I think the only gripe I'd have is that I would have, because Miranda and Evelyn were both characters who kind of, even though they were the main villain of their respective games, they kind of got overshadowed by everything else till the very end and kind of never really got to shine on their own. So I think they're competing for space there, but I personally would have preferred like kind of it to be more about Evelyn, because like when she gets the chance, like Paula Rhodes to go off on it, like that's just a fantastic character. But yeah, that's like kind of a nitpick rather than anything else. But like I say, overall, really enjoyed that.
Excellent. And then we come to you, Andy. So, what were your thoughts in general about the DLC or Shadows of Rose in particular?
So, excuse me. I played it on Saturday for the very first time, so I was quite late to it, and I felt very similar to like when I played Separate Ways, in the fact that like we're kind of revisiting a lot of old things that we visited in the game, and it just didn't feel substantial enough for me. Like, and it definitely wouldn't have been, and it makes total sense that Resident Evil 9, the proposed Resident Evil 9, there obviously wasn't enough content to make that completely about Rose, as evident by Shadows of Rose. It was a fun 2.5 hour, 3 hour experience, which makes it longer than Resident Evil 3 remake, which is nice. But yeah, I was just a bit, I don't know, it flew by, and I don't feel like I gained anything more than when I played the main campaign. It's just it's cool, quirky little side campaign with a few new elements that, I don't know, it felt like Capcom, it was almost like an alpha, like they were testing out some new features of the RE engine, and well, let's just stick it in the Resident Evil Village universe. Like, that's what it felt like to me. So I wouldn't say it was bad. It's just, I don't know why does this exist?
Yeah,
that's what I took away from it.
Yeah,
I did kind of get the impression that it felt like a rushed way for them to just close out the story left behind from 7 and Village without having to make a trilogy, because it seems like Capcom always makes a trilogy arc for most of the storylines. And you start with 7 with Ethan, and we concluded in Village, and it was kind of just, I get the impression they wanted to move somewhere else quick. So, all right, let's just close this off and set it off with Shadows of Rose. So, I guess we'll save that for what they have playing for the future for 9. But yeah, that was part of the impression I got from that too.
But that does go back to what we were led to believe. Oh yeah, Resident Evil 9 is going to be based around Rose. It's going to be really expansive. Evidently, they had no plans for Rose, so they just put together this very, very small, effectively tech demo for some cool features. I'm not saying that I didn't enjoy it. I know it seems like this is a very negative criticism. It's not. Some of the scenes in it were absolutely fantastic, like the whole doll scene with the things calling after you, dude. We caught some stream clips and we were absolutely petrified. So it was really good, and I'm happy it was kind of, it had a real horror focus on it, which was nice. But again, like, who's it for?
Yeah. I did feel that playing through the DLC myself, I mean, obviously everyone's mentioned the dollhouse and the Beneviento location. I'm not ashamed to say that I had to stop and take a breather several times. That was way more intense than I anticipated it to be, especially after our first trip there in the main Village game. I didn't expect them to top that. But besides that, I thought the other thing they did well was kind of the way they made the castle of Lady Dimitrescu's castle more kind of creepy and terrifying in general. The use of their just, Rose just having like a flashlight to see everywhere, and it being a lot more dingy and kind of hard to see, and you're hearing all sorts in the background. It was like they kind of did try to go more horror than the main game, and it was generally good. I mean, if I wanted more of a horror experience, I'd say the DLC did it better than the main game.
100%.
But again, it's like you say, it barely plays longer than Resident Evil 3 Remake for a start. But what we did get, it was a nice kind of small but good quality DLC, I'd say. But I felt it missed an opportunity in a way, because we did revisit Beneviento and Dimitrescu's places, but they could have maybe even gone a little bit more and tried to use unused concepts from, say, Moreau's area, or maybe even just done a slight hint of Heisenberg, but that's it.
And sorry to cut you off, but there was, if you guys remember the original reveal trailer for Resident Evil Village, there was a section where I think you play as Elena, and it was in the reveal trailer. You might have to go back and have a look, but there's a part where she's like holding like a torch, and there were just scenes all over that Village reveal where I was like, I didn't see any of that in the main game, so I thought they would come up in Shadow of the Rose, but unfortunately they didn't. I thought we was going to have maybe something to do with the villagers, but again we didn't. So I'll be very interested to see, like, years down the line, we're talking about 1.5. I'd love years down the line, they're like, what did they end up doing with all of these additional areas and additional cutscenes and whatnot that they shot?
Yeah, until it was announced. Sorry, I just cut you off then, Kai. I didn't mean to. I was just going to say, until it was announced, Shadows, everyone pretty much, self-included, thought it was going to be about the villagers. So,
agreed.
I mean, that's the thing. I don't think Capcom really had anything planned, because I kind of found it a bit surprising when they said, all right, we heard the fans' request. We are now making DLC for Village afterwards. It's like the way that most games and game companies operate now is you got to have DLC ready to go right out the door as soon as you launch the main product. I mean, that's kind of just the layout of the land. So when they announced that, it kind of looks like they were surprised by the actual turnout for the game. And they were like, okay, well, we're going to come up with this story. And we heard you, we're going to put out DLC soon. And that told me, like, okay, they're guessing now what they're going to be doing next. And I think at the end of it, it would have been, I think from a narrative perspective, it would have been much better to see villagers, or just a story approach from the villager side of things, as opposed to just focusing on Rose. Just because to me, it's much more interesting since they left so much untold there. What the hell is actually the point of this village? Like, what does everyone do living there underneath, Mother Miranda, all the other houses? Like, how do they all work with each other? Like, what does the life look like in that village? I ask myself this question all the time. Things.
It's a bit of a missed opportunity to work on the villagers. I mean, like you say, there was that moment in the original trailer where we saw Elena with like a lantern going through a dark space. We saw a villager cradling Rose as a baby at one point. So there was lots of little bits that we've kind of forgotten, but they are still there in the original trailers that could have opened up for more. I'd say probably about a third of that we didn't even see in the final game, or just got dropped as concepts.
And that whole village sequence, it was so bizarre, because like you walked into and met all of these villagers who all introduced themselves and literally died like 5 minutes late, like not even 5 minutes later, like 30 seconds later. It's like, why the can we swear on this?
Yeah, I'll just beep it out if I have to, but you can swear.
Why did they need to establish everyone in that room only to murder them mercilessly 30 seconds later? Even Elena, like, you just drop her into the fire. Like, they definitely had more stuff planned, which they did not end up using. And now I have more questions than answers. Now I've played Shadows of Rose.
Yeah. Do you know what the biggest question I had about this whole DLC wasn't the whole kind of the villagers or a prequel showing how the Lords got their powers or whatever. It was the whole, at one point when we all collectively finished Village, and we probably all discussed this on Twitter at one point, but we all had that moment where we were like, have they done a time skip in that ending sequence, or have they actually accelerated Rose's aging? Because there was that whole thing on the flasks behind me on the labels saying that if without treatment it causes accelerated aging. So was this set like maybe a couple of months after Village, or was this a 16-year time skip? And now we know that from the ending of Shadows of Rose that the time skip did happen, and because of the context of the way that DLC pans out, Rose still has her powers after 16 years. So how does that open it up for her? Is it potential that she could still be a main player after, a hiatus of 16 years worth of story, or is it's going to be just, she's in the background, she's got powers, but she's not going to be part of the main story anymore?
I think that's just Capcom kind of forgetting some of the rules they established in the narrative, and then because, like you said, it accelerates growth. I think there's some things in their story writing they completely forgot about when putting out the DLC, and they're probably just like, yeah, sure, fan base, that's what's going on.
I guess it was kind of like a little kind of, this could happen, we're teasing you of it, but we're not going to use it.
Yeah.
It is more the whole, now that we know she's still got her powers after the 16-year time skip, do they just going to forget her like they did, Jake Mueller or all the other kind of one-time characters we've had that we want to see again?
Well, the problem like Capcom have is, I think it started back in the original Resident Evil 2, because like Shinji Mikami wanted to have that be the definitive end to the series, and then it was kind of overruled, and it said we'll make it more of like an anthology meta series. So it's like they have like Chris as the kind of connective thing, and then go, oh yeah, there's a connection between these. We'll create like files to explain it, but other than that, it's just basically, well, this is a new story now. We'll do whatever we want. So we won't get answers to most of those questions that like we're wondering. I don't think.
I mean, we do have that case a lot. I mean, even after all these years with Code Veronica, we're still wondering how the did that rat write that diary?
But also, I think
how do you pick up a pencil for a start, let alone open a book?
But for like
Ratatouille,
9,
I was thinking Mousetrap.
But they left too much undone too at the end of Village as well. Like the whole, for one thing, this BSAA now all of a sudden going from being a benevolent organization to now, all right, now we're supposed to start kind of seeing them as a stand-in for Umbrella. Yeah. That's why for 9, whatever they did with Rose, I'm sure that's we're not going to see Rose till way further down the line, because that's too much story to be skipping over. Mm-hmm. And there's still so much left especially for Chris. I'm not ready yet to see Chris, pushing 60 or 70.
Old man Redfield.
Old man. I mean, it's a cool idea, but I don't think we're ready to get there just yet.
But that is a fantastic, that's a fantastic segue into where is Resident Evil going now? Like they're in this weird transition. It's almost I compare it on my streams to Star Wars. We had a prequel series, and you had a next generation trilogy. If they're doing these remakes, are they just gonna keep cracking on with these remakes? I like to think of 4 as a culmination of everything, of all the features from the modern games like Village. They've refined the inventory system and the currency system. They've got a real good handle on the RE engine now. This is it's almost like a culmination of all of our efforts. Resident Evil 4 remake. Now what do we do after that? I have no idea.
Honestly, and I hate to say this because I wish Code Veronica got the remake first, but no more remakes. I think Capcom opened Pandora's box with the Resident Evil 2 remake. It was great, and as much as I would have loved to see other games remade, I think they should have stopped it too, because now I started seeing this. First of all, I think it's safe to say that Capcom started the trend way back when for survival horror. I mean, I know that we had Alone in the Dark kind of started it, but Capcom really pioneered that catchphrase, survival horror. And now I think that they started a new trend, which is the line of remakes, because after Resident Evil 2 remake came out, how many other main titles started remaking their old IPs too? We have the Dead Space
Silent Hill 2,
Silent Hill 2, and I know this
Alone in the Dark. Alone in the Dark.
Alone in the Dark. Yeah, full circle. So I think that's just becoming too convoluted now. Everyone's trying to get on that just to see, maybe reclaim back the old fan base. And I really think that after the 4th one, there shouldn't be any more remakes, because it's just treading over old ground. You can only tell so much new story that you can. There has to be new stories and new characters to come through. Even if that means I personally think that for the next few games moving forward, no more mainline titles. Give that a break and focus on side titles, just side stories that can be of their own game and just kind of reconnect us from old characters that have passed that can somehow just weave their way back into the main franchise's narrative. You know, for instance, Carlos is the most recent character revisited. Let's get a game with Carlos. You know, just start from there because he's very familiar with the fan base now after the third remake. He's very popular with the fan base. I think my opinion would be the next thing they should do is just try to bring someone like him back, give him his own story, then he will be important later down the line.
Yeah, I reckon it is kind of time that the I guess after 4 that, not that we don't ever want remakes ever again. I think they just need to go on a hiatus for a little while.
Yeah.
Come on, like sort of like an off season for Resident Evil remakes now. That's what it should be. I mean, I agree. I do want to see Code Veronica remade. I mean, it's one of the last games that really needs that kind of modernisation. Besides, obviously, the Outbreak files, which I've seen that clamoured for many times, along with people saying we should do 0 again. We should do the remake. We can get people saying we should do 5, for God's sake. I mean, really, that's still.
And that's what I'm saying. It's at one point, where do you draw the line?
I mean, you can't. To me, the point is, 5 just doesn't feel like the right one at the moment because you're still going to build up in the remakes that story again. And really, we've not seen anything featuring Wesker yet, and he's kind of the main guy you've got to build up to. And really, that's been extremely limited. But
he's got to appear in 4.
Yeah,
surely.
That's his one appearance he's got to have. The other previous 2 have only kind of hinted at him in like little Easter eggs, but besides that, it's just, again, maybe Code Veronica was the better choice, but you can see from Capcom's position financially for them and popularity-wise, 4 is the better choice for them in the long run. And speaking of 4, it's watching from the trailers and obviously the showcases we've seen recently, I can genuinely say I'm actually dead excited about this version of 4. I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of the original. I liked it when I was younger. Playing it back more and more, I found myself thinking this is starting to feel a little aged. I don't see why I liked it as much. It's still enjoyable, but this new version has given me a really good feeling as well. I'm really keen to see what they do. Even with the stuff we haven't even been shown yet, I'm really curious to see what we get to see. So, what are your guys' thoughts on the 4 remake?
I mean, it looks like it's going to be great. It's definitely going to be fantastic. I find myself asking, all right, well, what did I see in the original 4 as well? And I come to realize it's the gameplay that really just hooked me in, that caused me to play it for hours and hours on end. Because I know the general story, which it's not hard to wrap your head around, which is Leon goes to save the president's daughter. But I honestly couldn't really tell you much about any of the files or any of the lore that you find along the way. And I collected and read all the files out, over and over again in the original one. It just wasn't that memorable of an actual storyline to follow along to, but the gameplay was just what really got stuck in my brain. So I'm hoping with the remake, and it looks like that's been their approach with the other remakes, is to really give more weight to the story itself. Because I think after a certain point, Capcom they kind of just guessing what next game where. Like after 4, where do we go from 4? We went to 5. After 5, the narrative it became too convoluted. I think now they have a chance to go back, tighten up some areas that just didn't make sense, and have it progress a bit more, like not easier to understand, but more of a flow to it. So I'm really excited for that. I think they're gonna have a chance to really tell the stories that make a bit more sense.
Okay, yep. Definitely think this is their chance to kind of improve on what they did before with 4. I mean, I'll admit that it doesn't need a lot of improvement. It's not a huge thing that needs to change. I mean, the main one for me is just being able to move around and fire my gun, because I've got so used to that with the remakes now, and going back to the original 4, it's just jarring, being just stuck on the spot like I've just stepped in a tarp or something. You just realise all you can do is just turn on the spot. That's it.
I'm really curious to see how with the way they did like grounded reality, so to speak, with the 2nd and 3rd remake, how they're going to introduce into this world the characters like not Sadler. What's the little short guy's name again?
Salazar.
I can't believe I forgot him. Salazar. Yeah, little Salazar. We already saw him in the trailer. I'm really curious to see how they're going to introduce him in this new universe.
They've definitely gone with Salazar. I'd say they've gone for that. I don't quite know how to describe it. He looks a bit more kind of slimy, a bit more kind of, way more unlikable. He's just, the original was kind of funny, cheesy, but this guy just seems a bit more
Hezbollah, bro. Hezbollah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess the other thing with 4 is they've definitely ramped up that horror style, and even from the gameplay elements we saw, we did see almost a little bit of almost like stealth moments with Leon when in his first encounters. So what do you think to kind of the new kind of potential of more stealth-like kind of gameplay, even though obviously it's a bit it's extremely left field for a Resident Evil game, besides the obvious with Sherry in Resident Evil 2.
Yeah. I just hope that stealth is optional. We don't have any 4th stealth segments because, no, it can always be hit or miss with something like that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how, in the original you could just run past encounters if they got too much, depending on where you were, but how much if they got stealth in there, whether they bring that in to a degree, whether it's possible to sneak past without killing anyone in a particular encounter if you're running low on ammo, or whether that'll affect how much ammo you get, that kind of thing.
I'm thinking that might be implemented around the section where you get captured the first time and you're locked up there with Luis and you escape and you automatically get your items back in the original one, but I'm imagining there might be a section where you're completely weaponless and you gotta just sneak around villagers, probably at night when their heads are all even more popped out. That'd actually be pretty intense.
Yeah. Sorry, were you going to say something then?
Yeah, I was just going to say that obviously the original Resident Evil 4 was obviously a lot more action-based. I think the way the gameplay is going to go, I think it's going to allow old fans to go the action way and new fans to go the stealth way. A bit like Metal Gear Solid, how that series works. You can go gun heavy and run straight into it and attack everyone, or you can just sneak around and not get the attention of anyone.
Yeah,
I think that's going to...
I guess I could see that working with the option of, go guns blazing and, murder a local cow for some ammo, that kind of thing, like we used to do. Even though I do feel bad for the cow in the remake being set on fire and used as a kamikaze nearly, but...
As long as you get to still throw a chicken egg in someone's face, I'm okay with that.
But that's one thing we haven't had in the remakes yet. How is the mechanics of the RE engine going to work with a chicken egg? That's going to look gorgeous. We used to get excited when we got golden eggs back on the old engine. Can you imagine how much we blow our minds when we get this?
Just get high res, as the yolk and the everything cracks over some guy's face.
I can just imagine all those times we saw Birkin in the 2 remake and all that kind of fluidy, kind of scattered, kind of subsurface scattering we got with his body. Can you imagine that with an egg hitting someone? That's going to end up being the most beloved thing since Lady D came out.
I suppose we were concerned that it was going to be an all-out action, but it does look like the pace is completely changed. It feels like super horror. It feels like I'm a kid and I'm seeing Resident Evil 4 for the first time.
It's got
like the original Resident Evil 4.
I mean, I don't know if there's anyone who's got this, but when I watched it, it felt like that's what it looked like to me when I first played it, and that was back in 2005. I mean, the moment we saw Dr. Salvador and those eyes looking at me, and thanks to you, Central, I was terrified of your profile picture for a few weeks when you did that. That genuinely terrified me. It was the first time I've been scared of him. I mean, the original, he was quite... You got terrified when he lunged at you, but just looking at this guy...
See, wait till they introduce the twins, though, the sisters, with the chains. Yeah, that was always the most horrifying one on the original for me.
I guess it was always the sound with them. The screaming was the worst part, especially. There'll be like a cross between a Banshee and Texas Chainsaw Massacre with them in this one.
What I'd love to see... I was going to say, what I'd love to see is how... Are they going to integrate separate ways into the main campaign?
I mean, like points that happen in separate ways. Like, would you see Ada at some points where she actually appeared during separate ways? I kind of hope they don't. I hope separate ways is still playable, but I still would hope that we don't see new sections pop up in there where usually she remained hidden. I kind of like the surprise of that without it being known that it's there.
I guess maybe the best they could do with that without kind of spoiling it and making it feel like it's just been forced is maybe just some telltale signs she's been there. I mean, I know in the original we had like that note we got where she threw a paper airplane with a kiss on it. Maybe just something similar, like some spent ammo that comes from her weapons lying around, and you're like, what the hell's this? just like little
Yeah.
tidbits. I mean, there's going to be little Easter eggs to things all the time, and we had this with the 2 and 3 remakes we saw in the demos and the other bits around that we saw hints to the kind of what they were doing next. I mean, with the 2 demo we heard like Nemesis near the start, near the RPD gate, and the 3rd one we got the hint of parasitic infection and all this, which sort of hinted in a way to 4, and obviously Village's setting in general hinted to that. So I mean, I don't expect them to do another remake after this one, not for a while, but I'm curious, would they have some kind of very subtle hints towards whatever they're working on next in there, if they're going to go down the similar route?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, Village was, in my opinion, Village was full of RE4 Easter eggs, like with the inventory, obviously with the merchant, the currency. So and now that Resident Evil 4 has been announced and you see the gameplay, you think, damn, it's so obvious like that they was going to be doing a Resident Evil 4 remake. Why did we even think that it was going to be a possibility when it was 100% going to happen? Again, I like to think of these. RE4 remake is going to be a culmination of of all the tricks and trades of the RE engine and all of Capcom's efforts into this one game. I really, really do believe that. The Village, in my opinion, was just a blueprint for RE4.
Yeah, we had that with 7 and then 2 and 3 as well, didn't we? Where we they obviously inspired with the item boxes and everything else, and the backpacks that became the side packs, and which is why I've been saying if RE9 is a co-op with 6 item slots and you like run around, like, then that's when you know they're doing 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still do not.
Oh, 0.
If it's a mainline title, no co-op. I'm still against that. Maybe he has like an afterthought or something. If you can play the campaign through as both co-op or single player, it's got to be single player to me, man.
Yeah, just give us the option. I mean, we saw with just to go back to the Village DLC, we obviously got the option of the third-person mode as well. Now, just briefly want to touch on what everyone's thoughts were on the third-person mode for Village. I mean, did you really notice kind of any real difference, or did it just felt like it was only just there to rightly help those that can't play first-person because of motion sickness or whatever, but did it really change the experience for you?
Yes and no. I mean, the animations were still a bit off in some points, but it played out interestingly. There's some points where it did feel a little bit different, but it just somehow, when you look at the enemies, when they react to it, still felt like they were reacting to you in a first-person type of gameplay format. Like I don't know, just the way they set up some of the enemies to be circling you, when you're in first person, you turn over, boom, there they are, they kind of surprise you. So they just kind of wait there off screen if you're not facing them, so you get that kind of sudden jump scare from turning. When you pull the camera back into a third person perspective, it just feels a bit awkward. That's kind of the impression I got from playing through it on that. And I still don't get the whole "we can't show you Ethan's face" thing. That's just what's the joke there?
Dude, Shadows of Rose was so funny for that, man. Where it was literally like, it'd be like the barrel of the shotgun, like, or just like hiding his face, man. Funny.
Yeah, I think ironically, I've noticed it more in Shadows of Rose than in the third person of the main game, but you could also tell, I think, although they pulled out and add the character model there, it was still first person mechanics in terms of, like, you couldn't do the thing you used, like in the RE2 bosses, you'd turn the camera around so you're looking behind you while still running, but if you do that, then Ethan or Rose just turns around and walks backwards really slowly, and that kind of I think it didn't really affect too much in Village itself, but in that boss fight before you go into House Beneviento with Rose, that's where I kind of felt it, when you're in that tight space and trying to, like, see behind you while he's chasing you. That was where it was like, this still controls like a first-person game.
Yeah.
This does all feed in, though, to this identity crisis that Capcom has, whether they want a first person or a third person. Like, I really believe Village completely half-baked on how they wanted to do third person. Like, so Shadows of Rose, so the main game, first person originally. Shadows of Rose, third person only. then they bring out a patch for the main game for third person, but they leave out mercenary mode. What if it's an accessibility thing? Just make it all first person and all third person. I thought they were making a statement with Shadows of Rose by saying, right, this is now third person. Resident Evil is now officially a third person series. That's what I thought they were doing, but I don't know. Just seems to be all over the place as ever with Capcom.
I just think that like translating it into third person for the mercenaries mode, since Shadows of Rose looks like it was kind of a new build within that particular engine, so you know they probably made new animations and everything for Rose herself. Instead of translating it from first person, they built it from the ground up third person. Much easier to do. But I mean, we already saw how Village kind of behaves in third person. It's a bit janky at times. You know, holding the block button up as Ethan in third person still looks a bit weird. Having to translate that to the frenetic action that is in Mercenaries mode, I imagine would make it actually probably less fun of a time to play and a bit more difficult too. That's kind of one of the things that they probably tested it and they probably thought this works better in first person, because if we try anything else, it's just going to hamper the gameplay.
Yeah. And, I mean, I'd say with the third person for myself, I guess for me, Village was good in a way. I mean, to be honest, it was one of my favourite ones that we've had for a while, along with like the 2 remake Village and 7 and all that. But I felt like when I played it in third person, it detracted a lot in the main game. With Shadows of Rose, I was perfectly fine with just third person because I was just experiencing it like that for the first time, which was fine. But because I'd experienced Village at least through 8 or 9 playthroughs in first person, I just felt kind of taken out of it completely. It lost a lot of its kind of horror elements. Even going through House of Anabiento, I didn't feel the same panic I used to. Even in first person after several playthroughs, I'd still feel a bit nervy, but this time it just lost some of that aspect, I'd say. Maybe it's just me and I just probably get more scared in first person easily. But it's, like you said, there is a bit of an identity crisis, and it's also making me question, with Resident Evil 9, are they just going to go back to third person, or are they going to be like every trilogy of Resident Evil and stick with one variation of gameplay for each trilogy and just finish this with first person? Or they're just going to think, right, we don't need to hide Ethan anymore, or we don't want to, basically just go like every first person horror. We just want to go back to our third person roots, which was our most successful period.
It's not even necessarily going to be a trilogy now, is it? Because it could be...
What story is there to tell, right?
I guess,
that's it now.
I guess the only thing left really is how they left it hanging with the BSAA thing, but then also the whole, we got introduced, Blue Umbrella again in 7 for the first time. Then in Village, all they got was like a little Easter egg reference on a syringe. So that, and obviously the Zoe document that you could read before the game, there was kind of obviously touching on the BSAA and the connections, but then both the connections and Blue Umbrella have sort of kind of dropped off maybe, and just the BSAA has become the main threat now. So 9 potentially has got to either make use of these 2 new organisations that they've kind of brought in, or they've got to just, like before, just leave it and just focus on the BSAA and start afresh on their whatever comes after 9.
Unless, because they see obviously Modern Warfare came out at the same time and it's got everyone's been tanking it, they just sort of have us go in first person Chris shooting down loads of Chris zombies to take out COD zombies competitor.
I would be shocked.
I'll be honest, I played as Chris in Mercenaries mode, the Additional Orders, and for the first time in my life I actually experienced motion sickness from the way he moved. That was quite worrying. He was actually too fast for me to play and I actually had to stop. I'm hoping if that is the route, I hope they don't go down that route for the next entry, but if they do, I've got the feeling it's actually going to make it unplayable for me.
I think that from what they left off at the end of Village, 9 is probably, and this is just one speculation, and I think they are going to try to focus on the trilogy aspect that they've been doing for the moment. So 9, I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up getting us back into Chris's perspective, and it's all first person, and then up tying what was left off with the BSAA and Blue Umbrella, and we see the conclusion to that story, which I imagine might disappoint some people because I know that it feels like the general consensus is number 9 is like it's gonna be this big grand thing now. Like, what's number 9 gonna be about? When it's probably gonna feel like an extension of Village at that point. So, it's just one thought that I think they might do.
Okay. Well, you got any thoughts on the direction of 9 now, considering what we've seen in Village and the DLCs?
I think for me, I think they're just going to focus more into the horror. You can see it from RE4 remake and obviously Shadow of Rose. Horror has developed more and more. I think, obviously, the series based and brought the whole term survival horror. I think that's where they're going to bring it more back into. So, obviously, tight spaces, that kind of thing, inventory management. I think I could see them going back that kind of tone.
Okay.
For the record, I hope that they go back to that too. That was just one speculation about the action thing. I hope the horror thing gets amped up for the next one.
They've definitely figured out how to do horror, even if it's just in small, intense pockets. They seem to have made some of the most brilliant horror moments in the last few years. Even with like 3 remake in the moment in the power station with the Drayton Demos, that still terrifies me now. Even when I go in with it fully tooled up, it's still a very good little piece of horror, but with a quite decent amount of action to get you through it. But I'm hoping, obviously the Shadows of Rose as well, that I hadn't seen that much limitation with weaponry and item management in a long time. I mean, even in like 7, you still had quite a limited inventory, but not to the point where you only had 2 guns to pick from. I mean, obviously that was more down to the time constraints, but still, it gave me much more of a survival horror theme in general than obviously Village 7, 2, and 3 have achieved, and that was only with a 1.5 to 4 hour worth of gameplay at best.
Yeah, I think they'll probably try and bring some of that back, because obviously there's been a lot of us who've been saying that for a while, that we want to go back in that direction. But I think from what I've seen of like their sales figures and stuff, so the pure survival horror doesn't sell as well from like that as much as action, so they'll still want to kind of bring more traditional fans back while still balancing it and still having that level of action, which is why they probably see more that kind of one segment which is devoted to horror being more of a thing, I think, in the long run.
I wonder if that's what we've seen in the Resident Evil 4 remake, where they've given the players the choice to choose the tone of what game they want to play. Same with the point of view as well, they're giving the players the choice. I think trying to get the attention of most fans, because obviously a lot of us have a point of view that we find we like and a tone of game we like. If they can appease to the wider audience, a lot more people can access that game.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've mostly covered what we can expect from the mainline games now, and obviously Village, how we expect the story of Village to go. But obviously, is there anything kind of spin-off wise that hasn't been touched for a while? That, I mean, knowing Capcom's history, they're probably not going to touch a lot of their old storylines that they've started and not finished. But there's obviously been the rumours of another Revelations coming out, and that, I mean, would that be something we'd want to see in the near future?
Absolutely, and I have my own idea too on a spin-off story as well, which I think would be pretty good. I was mentioning earlier about Carlos, and from what I can tell in previous entries of the game, I don't think we've ever actually really been to a kind of tropical jungle setting, with the exception of
Dark Side Chronicles.
What was the mission in Dark Side Chronicles? It was
Operation Javier, wasn't it?
Operation Javier, yeah. But that's still a bit of a small kind of fish in this entire pond here, and I think that it would be cool to see a side story about bringing Carlos back. He worked for the BSAA. He gets a job from Chris. This is kind of an under-the-table job. Small recon team. There's no funding from BSA. This is totally off the record. There's word of BOW activity in South America, then heavy into the area of controlled by warring drug cartels. You guys got to go in, small man team, go into the jungle, see what's going on, and it's just all sorts of hell in the jungle, because the jungle can be a perfect setting for horror and survival horror. Have you ever been in the middle of the night where it's raining, you just hear all sorts of creatures around you, actual creatures, predators? It's terrifying. Throw in some body horror, that could be a fantastic setting.
It's definitely one of those kind of environments we haven't had yet, that kind of almost jungle-like one. It's, I mean, obviously we've had the Antarctic, we've had cities, we've had abandoned mansions, we've even had inside a volcano. I mean, really, a jungle is not off limits at this point. They're willing to go very far with this.
It's the opportunity to do a predator-like tyrant as well, and obviously someone like Carlos is a perfect stand-in for Arnie, that type of thing.
Absolutely.
Nice. I genuinely want to see just Carlos, just, you know, covered in mud, just, you know, topless, just trying to fight a tyrant with his bare hands and a plank of wood. That's the vision I'm getting right now. Just in a big plank and a nail in it.
That will be the thirstiest Resident Evil game ever created, I think.
Well, we've been excited over a 9'6" woman, so I think really we can forgive people being excited about Carlos in a jungle.
See, Chris had it easy, man. He punched a boulder. Boulder can't fight you back. You know, let's see Carlos, you know, go toe to toe with an actual tyrant. That would be awesome.
Yeah, you know, Chris is just a bully to sedimentary and igneous rock. That's it. He's awful. Anyway, but yeah, seeing like something like Carlos in a jungle setting would be good. I mean, we've obviously seen how, you know, various villains from past have, you know, been killed off ungratuitously or whatever, but we've seen how, even with Alex Wesker's still out there as well, as to maybe a way that could be revisited perhaps, or maybe hinted that they're going to come back to it at some point.
As long as it's not like forced in or any kind of way, if there's a subtle way to bring her back in, then if you can do it, yeah.
I was going to say, we just don't want it to be like, I'm sure we can all agree that the Mother Miranda thing, while when we first encountered that moment when she was kind of shoehorned into the past of Resident Evil, it was a nice little shock, but then when you take a step back and think on it, you realise that was it. It was just, there's no real kind of depth to it. It's just there. She knew an old guy that got stuck on a mountain.
Like, I can't recall who said it. It might have been Beggy from Row, but someone was saying that they had the impression that they brought up a way that, oh, Mother Miranda, when you're looking through all the architecture and all the visuals of Village, it's very dungeon-esque, it's very gothic in its appearance. And if you look at the earlier Resident Evil games, a lot of their structure, especially in like the laboratory settings, it looks very dungeon-esque. A lot of cold stone brick walls and a lot of chains and, you know, iron bar gates. And that actually sounds like it could have been a great way to tie it in. Like this inspiration that you see like in Resident Evil 0 at the training facility, and then some of the holding cells in the Spencer Mansion, the way they look so gothic in appearance, that could have been a great explanation that, all right, Miranda there was some kind of inspiration Miranda's in, because we see how all that kind of architecture reflects its way in Village. And then it was not even an idea that they had.
No, it did feel like just like a big reveal that led to nothing in a way, but I guess the only way it could fit in now is if, God forbid, they redo the first Resident Evil again in the RE engine, or they end up doing Zero, like I've seen some people clamouring for, besides, well, I don't really see the reason to, but if there's like some subtle Easter egg hints to her influence somewhere in the past, then maybe that'd be alright, but I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, no,
honestly, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I mean, if we're talking about filling in kind of gaps in the story, I'd much rather see, I mean, we end Village on that kind of cliffhanger about the BSAA and they've corrupted and they're using bioweapons. And we know from the Baker House report that they've like kind of asked why Chris has commandeered the Hound Wolf squad and done all this stuff. But we also know anyway that there's all these characters who are connected to the BSAA who we've not seen for a while. Like, I mean, the most obvious one being Jill, but it includes Sheva, Barry, and others. And there's easily like enough fodder there for something like, particularly where you've got them maybe unraveling some sort of conspiracy from the inside, or even being convinced that Chris is the bad guy by the BSAA and this kind of propaganda like tin. And obviously there's a number of different ways you could weave like a game around that, but like the story potentials, again, I don't think this is kind of like a wish list. I don't think Capcom will make anything like this, but the potential to do, there's an awful lot there.
Yeah, there's definitely potential with the, like you say, those that are associated with the BSAA or formerly associated. Even Rebecca Chambers in her kind of consultation role that we saw in, obviously, Vendetta. I mean, it's an extreme long shot she's going to come back to the games, but they were willing to reintroduce her into a CGI film over a decade after her first appearance as well. So really, I guess anything's possible with them. It's just, are they willing to retread story or just keep doing new things every time and hope it just comes together somehow?
And I think what they could do with Chris is actually touch down on a bit of a story narrative that they kind of teased at with Code Veronica, and at the end of one, I guess, where it kind of felt like Chris and everyone, like the surviving stars, were going off on their own. They had no backup, no support, and there they were, just the three of them, Chris, Jill, and Barry, going off after Europe on their own, like using whatever resources they had at their own. That was kind of just teased. Now I think there's a potential to do that and actually give us either a game or a full story where Chris goes rogue with Hound Squad. They get excommunicated from the BSAA, whatever. They're operating totally on their own accord, and I don't know, maybe kind of some, I don't want to say Jason Bourne-esque type story here, but they take their skills and what they have on just bare minimum and kind of bring the fight back to their door, because something's happened with something's obviously happened with the BSAA, but I'd like to see them try to take it down from their own end.
Yeah,
I think that'd be great.
Yeah, we'll have to wait. I mean, we've still got obviously 4 coming up, and that's not really going to deviate much from its original story, but just add to it. But then, obviously, we've discussed how we're hoping like Separate Ways is still there. I mean, we've seen how Village did their version of the Mercenaries mode. I think that's pretty much a given. That's going to be back in 4 again. It was probably one of the better versions they did. I guess then, once 4's done, I mean, 9's a given. We're going to see that. I mean, obviously we can theorise about the story all night, but we'll be here for another hour at least. But I guess just outside of the games, Resident Evil in general has tried a lot of stuff. I mean, we've seen like the Welcome to Raccoon City film we had just over a year ago, and obviously that was a kind of a mixed reaction because we kind of got a lot of nods and homage and even following sort of the story of the original 2 to 3 games, but then so that fell apart, and then obviously I'm not going to get started on Resident Evil Netflix. We know obviously people's reactions to that, but now we know that they've attempted several different kind of spin-off media as such. Where does the IP go outside of the games as well? I mean, what do you reckon we could possibly see next on that front?
Well, I have my thoughts on it, and I think that first of all, the issue is, I think it's an issue of translation versus adaptation. Too many people try to adapt the game to the screen when it's just, you got to look at it from a translation point of view. To me, like, it's not exactly video games, but a perfect example is the Sin City movie by Robert Rodriguez. That was a translation, direct, page-to-page translation of the comic to the big screen. It was just following it as a blueprint. I think if we're gonna see another movie that's attempting to tell the story of the games again, it's got to be treated like that as such. But also, most importantly, if they try to do another movie, whether it's based off of a game or an original story, I think it has to be able to stand alone on its own. No setup at the end of the movie for setting up a sequel or a whole cinematic universe, just a beginning, middle, end. Let the movie stand on its own. In the case that it's not successful, you don't watch it and it has a weak ending where what's going to be coming next. Because it's just like the first game. The first game, it ends with everyone flying off to the sunrise. There's no cliffhanger, there's no loose ends left untold. So if they do a movie, it's got to end like that. It's got to be able to stand on its own.
Yeah, I'd say you're right. It does need to be something that can stand on its own, and I guess for me, in general, I feel like we've had kind of I want to say oversaturation of Resident Evil. I mean, when we think about it, since 2019, we've had Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, we've had Village, we've had a film, we've had a Netflix series, we've had Infinite Darkness come out, which we're not even certain if that's going to get a continuation or if it's actually classed as a series or if it was just like a spliced up CGI film. But I feel like maybe, I don't know, just with with this stuff, I'd want to see maybe something continue on the CGI front. We know Netflix isn't going to get a continuation after the way they've handled that. But with the CGI shows, I would like to see how they kind of touch upon maybe some of the bits that we don't know much about, like maybe some of the gaps between, say, 6 and 7, or maybe even some stuff around the post-Village kind of, in that 16-year gap once maybe 9's come out. But on the spin-off media side, I'm just really not sure what to expect at all. I mean, film-wise, it feels a bit draining after all these years.
I think the Last of Us TV series is going to change a bit, I think, because obviously with the Last of Us TV series, they're going to look into the games across a series of episodes, give them the chance to develop those character stories and get that connection with them. So I think Resident Evil doesn't really suit the movie format. I think it does to a TV series where you can build up those connections with the characters. I think with Welcome to Raccoon City, I think the characters just weren't developed enough for new watchers. So it's sort of like just cannon fodder really to what you're watching. And then I think I liked about the new Netflix TV series is that most of the characters obviously introduced were new. They weren't restricted into what they could do with those characters. So I think, if there is going to be any spin-off, I'd love to see an episode series, maybe like the first game where you can develop those characters, their interactions and their history and that kind of thing. I think that would be more appeasing, I think, to fans.
Yeah. Phil, what do you reckon? Do you think there's much life in a series rather than a film format in general?
Yeah, I still personally think that you could tell a good Resident Evil movie. I think we just had the dirty rotten luck of this second attempt being kind of just ham-fisted. For case in point, is anyone familiar with the horror movie kind of franchise VHS?
Vaguely remember it, yeah.
Yeah, it's like an anthology movie. It's a collection of short films that are filmed from like a VHS perspective. They just released a new one called VHS 99, which all the stories take place in 1999. The second story in that is called Suicide Bit, and it's written and directed by Johannes Roberts, and it's actually tense and pretty scary. And that's that guy just operating on a small scale and a small budget. And I think that if he had just limited himself to just telling the first story on its own, just inside the mansion, the first movie actually would have been probably about as good as the first Anderson film. Like, it would have been able to stand on its own. I think it's just a matter of how much you're willing to extend your reach on it, and just for the first starting new with a movie, just keep it small. That's all I would say. A series, though, has the potential to have a wider grasp, and in that case, I would say go beyond the realm of the games. Let's start to explore more of the world. Not to plug my story in there, but the idea I have with carriers, I want to see what else is going on outside of the main storyline of the games. What else is going on in this world, and I think that's where a series should really try to take its direction.
Yeah, it's so I would, like you say, a series that delves more into the scope of outside of the main games would be good. And I think we do really need to avoid the whole Raccoon City kind of outbreak as well, because that's been played out so many different ways over the last obviously 25 years-ish, and really there is a lot more to the series than just Raccoon City getting nuked every 5 years when they really release something.
Mm.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories they can tell outside of that. They could even do an early anthology of Sheva's life when, obviously there was that whole incident where a family got killed in an outbreak. They could just cover that as like a mini kind of build-up story that leads into her joining the BSAA and it ends there maybe, or just kind of like an anthology of characters we don't know and looking into their backgrounds and their kind of encounters with like outbreaks and that kind of thing.
And depending on how they start RE4, I think that a series based on how Umbrella actually falls is really much needed, because
rather than just a one-liner at the start of Resident Evil 4.
Yeah.
Oh, the stock market collapsed. Oh yeah, it's done.
Like maybe there's like a last bastion holdout of like high-ranking officials of Umbrella hiding out somewhere, and it leads to this epic conclusion of how the company goes through the stock and they suffered financially, but there's like a last bastion of employees or high-ranking researchers still trying to hold out, and there's they're the antagonist, and the protagonists go to take him down, and it's a combination of horror and action. That story, I think, would make for a great series, and it needs to be told, because Umbrella was they were the main villains for the longest time, and then we just see them die off screen.
Yeah.
Worst way to die.
Yeah. Sorry, Phil, were you going to say something on that matter as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think whether they go with a series or a film, I think what it really needs is kind of time to like actually develop a thing, and because it does feel like, whether it's just so that the Constantine can keep the rights or whatever, they kind of rushing these things out, and the other kind of fear as well is that, like, whether it was Johannes Roberts' decision himself or whether it was forced on him by the studio, that decision obviously to make 2 games in one was a mistake. But it also feels like he knows what he's doing director-wise, that he just shouldn't have been the writer, maybe. But also, like, it feels like someone is kind of, because there was an interview with Constantine when they talking about the RE Netflix series, and he's talking about the kind of mistakes that they made with it in terms of like who it was aimed at and stuff like this. And it there's almost the worry of like they've gone, right, well, we made obscene amounts of money with the Mila Jovovich series, and then actually, look, we tried to be faithful to the games and it flopped. We tried to do something new, like wasn't purely like just action schlock, and it got panned. So we've got to go back to that kind of just churning out these big brainless blockbusters. And like, not saying that that's definitely what I'll have, but that's the kind of fear, like, when everything's kind of executive driven rather than someone creative taking the time, properly working over and treating this thing and saying, right, this is the story we want to do, and this is how we're going to tell it, and we're going to make it work and do it. I mean, if you could probably even mix it. I'd say a horror film based in the mansion, and then like something more like deeper, kind of longer series for like 2 and 3. If you were adapting the games, you could do that. But again, it feels like I'm just listing a load of things that I'd like, and then immediately going, but we're probably not going to get that.
It's just got to be done properly, innit? Like, obviously I'm going to be biased. But the concept of Carrier actually has a lot of merit if it was adapted into like a big, like, Stranger Things-esque style series. Like, Raccoon City has always been a character of Resident Evil. Aside from the explosion, like, it's underpinned by Umbrella. Why can we not see that? There was, obviously, I take it all you guys have seen Arclight, that small teaser clip.
Yeah.
Now that alluded to that kind of underpinning of like a major infrastructure behind Raccoon City to kind of, and it was referenced again in Resident Evil 3 remake of like the Umbrella billboards everywhere. They could have it like Resident Evil Outbreak, where it follows like the everyman, so it doesn't even have to be like a mainstay character. And it just follows through Raccoon City to its inevitable explosion. But the focus isn't the explosion, it's the build up to the explosion. I think that could work as a series because there's so much scope. Like, Brian Irons is being a bit weird, like, he's getting all them donations and stuff like that. Why are we sending a team out to the forest to do nothing? Why is no one asking questions? That sort of thing.
I'd definitely say that I think you've hit it right there. The Outbreak Files would work really well as a series, and there is a chance to expand on some of those bits that have always been hinted in, like 2, 3 and the Outbreak Files, and to an extent Operation Raccoon City as well, where you've got like these characters that are mentioned in the background. I mean, you're going to get focus on like Irons, obviously the STARS team being sent out to the Arclight Mountains and all that. But then there's obviously characters that we know hints of that we never get explained, we never hear much about, but they must have kind of a major stake in Umbrella or have a lot more kind of influence than we realise. Like, say, obviously the mayor of Raccoon City, he's mentioned several times. I felt like he's kind of a character that's not been explored enough, and the one thing I'd love to see most, which if the Outbreak Files ever gets remade, or we get, like, you pitch a Outbreak Files kind of series where it can be stretched out until the climax is just everything's nuked and it's done. I'd like to see how they'd handle, say, going into City Hall, and like there's like some kind of weird infected creatures in there they've got to avoid. They find like local documents insinuating that the mayor knew more about this, or just kind of like extra little world building. It might not mean much, but it's that nice little nod, but also gives us something new we haven't explored yet. That way it's still related to the game, but it's not so out of the way like we had with the Wesker clones with the Netflix series and that, but it's just a nice little kind of mesh. Well, don't know how best to describe it, just wibbly ball of RE love that we like so much.
Yeah, and imagine like, just day-to-day goings about for citizens of Raccoon City, and then slowly the outbreaks start to take over. I for one never thought that it happened instantaneously overnight like that. So I imagine parts of the city just falling under martial law, being quarantined. They even allude to that in the first level in Outbreak, when the cops block off the street and they told you we're evacuating this section of the city. Imagine people, just how do they react to what's going on in that part of the city? Oh, it's quarantine. Why? There's a nasty, something crazy going on over there. And little by little, parts of the city are being quarantined until they can't control it anymore. I mean, that's kind of what I'm trying to lead up to as well for for a story purpose. But it's that kind of just subtle, grim building towards this, terrible outcome that's going to happen, which there's so much you can do with that.
Yeah, I guess the closest we've ever got to that was the scrapped fan project during the storm. When we got with that was obviously we know that's not continuing anymore, but I'd say that's kind of in a similar vein to what we've just discussed as well. That kind of, like you say, not like a sudden instance where everything has just gone like, oh, I'm having a happy day, oh, there's 200 zombies. More like, oh, hang on, that dog's eating a dead corpse, what's going on here? Why is that crow just flown into that person's head? That kind of thing. There's weird, peculiar moments, like there's like cannibal murders and all this. That kind of slow build, it can work, like you say, into a series of sorts, and I think it does have legs. It's just whether they can find a way of kind of making it last, but also not stretching it out too far and people getting fed up and thinking this is too much of a slow burn.
There's a good... I don't know if any of you have ever read the book of World War Z. Obviously, that's like a global thing rather than based in a city, but it's nothing like the Brad Pitt movie. It's completely different, but it's basically a series of interviews with people, like kind of detailing how everything happened and like how this outbreak happened, and like people were completely unprepared for it and taken aback. And like you can imagine that on a city scale as well, particularly if it's something you've got either corrupt officials trying to cover up as well, and people not knowing what's going on, and like kind of piecing together slowly as this thing grows. That kind of the full picture until we finally kind of see what comes. Obviously, once we get to like the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3, where it's like full on outbreak. But I think that there's definitely more than a few ways they could do that, and do that quite interestingly, as you say.
Because to reach back on that, all the live action depictions of the Raccoon City outbreak, it's been too quick. And I feel like I can kind of pull this from my own personal experience. It's a staggered approach to destruction. I've gotten to live through seeing what like society can look like when it slowly falls apart. Down here in Florida, we've had many a hurricane come through, to the point that it was like living in an apocalyptic afterworld. Some of the destruction that happened when I lived through some of the major ones, and you see this kind of slow approach. First of all, you see people start to loot. There is a human factor to take into account that's also a threat, and that's why in Raccoon City we don't really get to see that. I think we've only seen it mentioned in passing. That's the first stage of it, is people going crazy, and then the actual human element that's a danger. And then you have the approach of the virus and the creatures, and slowly watching society fall apart. That just seems like it's been just passed over, and that's a very, very relatable, and I think absorbing kind of element to include in a story, because we just gloss over that particular fact of what can happen for a city falling apart, for society declining, martial law being enacted. I can go on all day about that, but I think that's something that makes for great series or storytelling.
Yeah, we I guess the only hint I can think of that kind of society devolving, apart from the obvious of seeing car crashes everywhere in the original Resident Evil 3, was that one guy who stole the gems from the local clock ornament just so you couldn't get to City Hall. That's the most vandalism he got in the whole game, which was a weird one. Whether he thought he'd die proposing to his wife and he just forgot he couldn't decide which gem to choose from. I don't. Just such a weird thing to steal. If you're going to get 2 of them, why not get all of them? He's not a thinking man's looter, is the way I'd describe him.
Because I think S.D. Perry refers to it in her novels too. She refers to looters long after the looters left the place around, and that's really where the first kind of instance came reading through the books. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, why wouldn't that be mentioned in the games or in the storylines or anything? It's a free for all for people to be going crazy, and it just gives them more immersion to the actual world of what could be going on there.
Which kind of actually leads me into kind of sort of final bit, which is I'll be honest, I haven't really read much in the way of novelizations on Resident Evil besides obviously the S.D. Perry novelizations, which only go as far as Code Veronica. So I don't know if there's ever been any others done based on the more recent games, but do you think we'd ever see like someone trying to take that on, maybe trying to continue a novelization of any of the newer games that come out, or would you like to see that done, or maybe even a continuation of S.D. Perry's kind of novelizations?
I mean, I'd read them, that's for damn sure. And I like what she did. She focused on some of the main storylines, and then she had side stories that kind of split out from that too. I'd like to see someone take their stab at it, either trying to tell a novelization of 4 and 5, and then maybe just bridge the gap between it with their own stories. I haven't seen it in a while.
Something that was really successful, which is not inside of Resident Evil, but it caused such a huge resurgence in another IP, was Cyberpunk Edge Runners.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if it's I suppose, because I mean Infinite Darkness isn't really an anime. It's more of just a retelling of Degeneration in my opinion, but if they had something that was more like a lot more leaning toward anime like Edge Runners, I think that would be an interesting concept, because you can take a lot of liberties without the big budget, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, they got the graphic novel coming out, haven't they?
Oh yeah, the Infinite Darkness one.
Yeah, so I wonder if they could be testing the water with that potentially, because we've not seen a graphic novel for quite some time. So if we get the interest from that, maybe that could feed in.
When's it coming out? Is it out yet?
No, they announced they've been wishy-washy with it. They were announcing it for next year, but it's now apparently some point this year.
Okay.
But it's on the way. They've confirmed that it's still coming. So.
Yeah, there's not much of the year left, so they need to.
They need to hurry up.
Get a shift on.
Yeah.
Well, it says here that it's expected 28th of March, 2023.
Oh yeah, I think that's a placeholder date they put in. It's not, because I messaged them on the Tokyo Pop, the publishers. They said it is coming on the way.
I'm just thinking now that obviously next March is when the 4 remake's supposed to be released, isn't it? I might be off, but
March 23rd, I think.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm just wondering, would this is probably extremely unlikely, but do you think that would probably be a good time for them to continue the novelization of the main entries by lining it up with the 4 remake?
I mean, it wouldn't hurt. It'd be a great event to piggyback off if it gets the name Resident Evil out there, so then you can just kind of saturate the market with other content.
Considering it's the largest, I'd say the largest Resident Evil and also one of the most successful ones, it'd be daft for them to not do it, but then again, I think they've been so focused on the game, I'd be surprised if anyone's had the time to just jump on that, which would have been a good way of reviving a novelization, or even allowing it to bleed into like the side stories like we had with Caliban Cove and Underworld. Hell, they could have even done a novelization of the Fall of Umbrella at one point, but I think that's maybe a bit too niche.
Wouldn't hurt. I mean, I think at this point it would help to start moving into more niche territory for Resident Evil.
Yeah, and actually, this is again, thank you. You're leading him into my last point before I went on to a tirade. But it actually leads into our other niche kind of thing, which coming up next year, which is Steamforged Games' Resident Evil board game, the first one, which is coming out next year. So obviously, I'm sure some of you, well, I'm hoping all of you have probably pre-ordered it by now. I'm waiting for mine eagerly. I'm curious how that's going to go. I mean, from the gameplay tests I've seen, it looks really great. The fact they've incorporated more puzzle elements into it, and the fact we're getting Crimson Heads back in another form now is great.
Oh, what is this, a board game?
This is the board game. We're talking about the Steam Forged one that's coming out next year.
Yeah, so when did it? I must have put a Kickstarter on that, like, it feels like years ago. And I'm like, I remember they had like a year ago, they had like an updated delivery date or something like that, and like to touch some details, but I haven't heard anything since. So have they actually got a release for that now? Or?
They said August.
Yeah.
Okay.
Their aim.
I'll be honest, I just saw the phrase Golden Tyrant and that won me over straight away. As soon as that was on the list on the Kickstarter, that's it, I was in there.
Yeah, I would like to get into the board games. Obviously, I pre-ordered it, so I might as well try it. Have you guys played any of the? Because RE2 and 3 is RE2 and 3 out, or is it just 2? Or
2 and 3 are out. Yeah,
they're both out. Yeah,
played 2. It's definitely great. 3 I've got, but I've not played it yet. I guess I'm still working my way through the B campaign on that, but. It's definitely a great one to play, and I'm just from what I've seen of Steamforged games, kind of demo gameplay of one of the levels, they've expanded it quite a bit with this new one with more kind of puzzle elements rather than just the usual, which is just walk around, find ammo, shoot, get to the end of the level. So it's becoming a bit more complex now, which is a really welcome addition they've made.
Because I did manage to play one of the missions with Steve, the creator and the designer of the game. It's really impressive. The new gameplay with the Crimson Heads introduction as well really spices up the gameplay a lot.
Yeah, there's also that new feature they've got with the side missions, so it's not just the characters you're playing as, there's also kind of extra missions that'll pop up during your campaign as well, so it does feel more kind of alive and everything's changing and you don't know what's going to kick off. Unlike obviously 2 was a little bit linear, but it was still an excellent game, and I'm worried of playing 3 because obviously you've got the Nemesis running around everywhere on that. You've not quite got the same kind of breathing space as you had with 2 and obviously 1 potentially as well.
So from an outsider though, say if you've never played, like obviously we've all played board games, but a board game to that extent, how would you describe playing Resident Evil the board game versus turning your PlayStation on and playing Resident Evil?
I'd say it, for me, when I played the 2 board game, I found that it was, it definitely made me think more about my item management because I couldn't tell where anything was. You don't know what you're picking up until you reach it, so you can't just, predetermine where you think there's going to be ammo or where you think there might be stored or whatever. And it does rely on you to run away more. It's not as much guns blazing as you could. Even if you put the game on like a version of easy mode with more ammo or whatever, it's still pretty tough to play at times. But it's a good one. It even gives you the option of like dodging enemies instead as well, which it's a nice little extra thing they throw in, and it's just a great laugh to play, and especially when you've got like a bit of atmospheric Resident Evil 2 music in the background. Just there putting Spotify on, just playing a couple of tunes. It's great.
That's cool.
It's definitely a good one to get your hands on and have a go with a couple of mates.
Has anyone picked up any of the vinyl album for the soundtracks for 1, 2, or 3? Veronica?
We've got a couple of them, and then we've got obviously the new repress of the original games soundtrack and the remix together. The Brain Splatter one.
Yeah, that's right.
Looking insane.
I got I got 2 and 3, the original soundtrack for 2 and 3.
Okay, guys. So I think we've definitely covered a lot tonight, and don't want to take up too much more of your time because I feel like maybe I've kind of rambled a bit too much. But we definitely got all through a lot, and I think it's definitely an exciting time to be not just a Resident Evil fan, but in general survival horror fan, like you say, with the upcoming releases of Silent Hill's Return, and obviously Dead Space, Alone in the Dark, and obviously whatever comes next with Resident Evil, whether it be board game, any other spin-off media, and any main entries we get. But I just want to say it has been amazing talking to you all tonight. You've been absolutely excellent, and this is the highlight of the whole thing for you now. This is your chance to plug what you do. So I'm going to start off with you, Carrier. So if you just want to kind of plug yourself, tell me what you do, where we can find you, and what you've got coming up.
Absolutely. So I do Carrier, a Raccoon City Story, which is like a film noir animated web series. And I'm currently in the mix of getting episode 2 put together, finalizing a lot of the artwork and putting it out. That should be releasing sometime early next year. And you can find me on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram. I have a lot of original music that I make for the series, which you can find on a SoundCloud that I have linked to everything too. So if you hear something you like, you can find it all there. And yeah, there's plenty more content coming down the pipeline from me.
Thank you for that. Okay, and Phil, if you want to just have a bit of a recap of what you got coming up and how we can find you and what lovely stuff we can look forward to on your channel.
Yeah, so I mean, my channel, I cover, like I say, mostly Resident Evil and Last of Us related stuff, but also more horror in general. So on YouTube, AK Black and Red, and everywhere else is AK Black and Red. Actually, like Twitter, I think is probably the main social media I'm active on. Ramble about something or other. But yeah, so that's the main thing. I think in terms of coming up, more reviews of like horror games that have come out this year, because I've heard a lot of good things about Signalis, which I'm really looking forward to getting into now. I've got a copy of it. That's going to be, and then the other big one at the end of the year will be once I finally get my hands on Callisto Protocol as well. So good Christmas come early for me with that, I think. But yeah, AK Black and Red on YouTube is the place to find me mainly.
Excellent, thank you. Will, so what you got coming up? What can you do? Where can we find you?
So yeah, if you want to keep up to date with everything Resident Evil, obviously with everything that's coming out, we keep a daily countdown of everything that we know of. You can find me on all social medias, including the new one, Mastodon, on just Resident Evil Central. And I think probably the biggest one coming up is I was lucky enough to get my likeliness and voice recorded for the upcoming cosmic horror game Quantum Error. So I'll be doing a playthrough of that, and obviously I'll be in there at some point. So yeah,
excellent to hear. Well done. And Andy, yeah, obviously we'd love to hear what you've got coming up and what you'd like to plug today.
Yeah. So Andy, Biohazard Declassified, main platform Facebook gaming. But yeah, I'm everywhere at the moment. All platforms, Biohazard Declassified. Currently helping Sean doing bits on Carrier, which is always glorious. And we've got some other collaborations coming up, which I'll announce in due course. But yeah, just keeping up with everything Resident Evil. It's a good time to be a Resident Evil fan. So
yeah, thank you again. Thank you all for joining me today. You've all been excellent to talk to. It's been such a good time. And let me just there we go. And yeah, that is pretty much it from us. Obviously, I've been R.E.T.I.N.A. You can find me on R.E.T.I.N.A 8719 across YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook mainly. Possibly some Instagram if I feel like posting something funny, which might happen. I don't know. Obviously, be on Twitter most of the time, at least until Elon Musk decides I'm not real. And obviously, project-wise, we've got coming up. Obviously, we'll do another podcast episode in the near future once we've had a bit of a thought on what we want to talk about next. The big project we've obviously got coming up, which obviously Biohazard Declassified you're involved with, and Phil and Will from Central and AK Black and Red, they're all involved in the Resident Evil Family Fortunes we are doing. And our first teams to be playing will be First Aid Spray and the Team RPD group, who will be playing soon, and we will get that episode up in the coming weeks hopefully. And then we will also have CrimsonHead.com versus High Dragon TTV as well. Everyone else will play in due course, and we will see who gets to be claimed as one of the most, I don't know if this is a good claim to have, but the most knowledgeable and nerdy of the Resident Evil groups, or that they have too much time knowing where to find a copy of Itchy Tasty.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, this thing right here.
Yeah, someone's got the book. I knew that was going to come out. Anyway, so that's our tonight's podcast episode. Thank you all very much for watching. I've been Retina Prime, and I'll see you all later.